we struggle and they cry out. For the Amazon, we struggle and they cry out. For the Amazon, we struggle and they cry out. For the Amazon, we struggle and they cry out. Listen to the cry of the forest. Listen to the cry of the forest. Her sons and daughters clamor for justice. Her sons and daughters clamor for justice. You stop the genocide. You stop the ecocide. You stop the genocide. You stop the pandemic.
Ecocide or Good Living, a roundtable dialogue to expand the world campaign for a new international law to criminalize ecocide. We live in times of genocide and ecocide, provoked by the politics of the current president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, with the denial of science in dealing with COVID-19, incentives for the predatory exploitation of the Brazilian Amazon, and the incitement of violence by illegal prospectors in indigenous territories, most recently against the Munduruku and Yanomami peoples. In this grave criminal context, as a contribution to the 6th pilgrimage of the Martyrs of the Forest, which celebrates the agroecological project of the Amazonian extractivists, Zé Claudio Ribeiro and Maria da Silva, defenders of the forest, murdered on the 24th of May 2011. This circle of dialogue has invited activists from socio-environmental movements, elected parliamentarians with a Good Living platform, and national and international NGOs to focus 4 questions. How to defend the natural rights of Mother Earth. How to defend the human rights of the defenders of the Pan-Amazon. How to integrate Brazil into the world campaign for a law against the international crime of ecocide. And how to popularize the ecological paradigm of good living as an alternative world community project.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy for this moment. I'm happy that so many people from so many places in the world have joined us in this walk, coming from other paths of so many years of struggle for the environment and struggling for human rights. It is an enormous gratitude to walk with you and also an honor. I'd like to say that the 6th pilgrimage of the Martyrs of the Forest is for us to remember the warriors that fell during their struggle. Not only Zé Claudio and Maria, but all of the others that before us have lost their lives defending the environment, defending human rights, for free lands and free waters. And I'd like to say that while we maintain the marches alive, the memories alive, they haven't won and they won't win. Because every year we watch more and more movements like this for us to continue claiming for our environment to be balanced and especially have our rights guaranteed. The moment Brazil goes through now is an extreme one. And I'm not saying here that it was easy in previous governments, nothing of the sort. But now it seems that definitely they have managed to find mechanisms to simply destroy all institutions of environmental protection and human rights. It is an absurd moment we're going through now, and I am sure that the entire world is accompanying it, and how we are surprised to see the amount of absurds that happen and simply We are every day losing more and more of our friends to this violence. But also, there is resistance, and we are resistance. To rise up for a campaign like this in the country is extremely important, especially with the support of people and organizations, also outside the country, because here we are being treated as enemies of the state. Those that fight for human rights are enemies of the state. Those that defend the lands, territories, and waters are enemies of the state. We are being arrested, disappearing, having to self exile to continue alive, fighting. And a campaign like this is extremely urgent, not only for us, the people that defend the environment, but the environment itself, which is being massacred by the state. Our laws, which are considered one of the best laws of environmental protection, are simply disappearing in this government. They are suffering drastic alterations that simply make the environment and the communities that need this environment alive suffer also with these flexibilizations. Human rights are also each time being more flexibilized or cancelled practically. There is a law that, in fact, it's an agreement, which I believe would be extremely important for Brazil to ratify, and simply this state now ignores it completely, which is the agreement of Escazú. That would go really well with this campaign. We need to pressure the Brazilian state to ratify the agreement of Escazú inside Latin America and Caribbean. Many countries have already ratified it, and Brazil is only signatory. So, it is extremely urgent that we continue with this campaign, that we strengthen this campaign here in Brazil and also outside Brazil. Because what we know is that, yes, a lot of people are going to sit on defendant benches over environmental crimes, especially here in our country. We know who they are. We have proof and we want justice. Justice for those that die defending the environment, the human rights, but also justice for the environment. Because the future generations are not going to forgive us if that doesn't happen. And we need to make sure that the future generations have a balanced environment. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I hope that our debate will be very, very beautiful and that it provides us with a great union on behalf of the environment and the human rights. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. First, we're approximately more than 140 villages in the high and medium territory, covering also part of the state of Mato Grosso. So our people are quite numerous, where we have not only Munduruku people, but also riverine people, traditional communities. It is an enormous area, this one, of traditional people. But here in the state of Pará, what we have the most is Munduruku people. In the state of Pará, there are more than 50 indigenous peoples living in the city, or the city actually took over the villages. And now there isn't how to remove the villages. So a lot of indigenous people have ended up in the center of the city, even inside the Amazon. Even in the Amazon, which people think that it's only about green and animals, but not in reality. We have a lot of deforestation going on. It is growing a lot. We are having a lot of allotments, farms. We have soy plantations, mining companies, getting established in the state of Pará. And now with this bill, which is being approved, and we hope it's not, one of them, which is remarkable, and the president talks about it, which is the Bill 191. It is about mining companies entering the territory, also dams, and there's also oil inside the territory, gas, and railroads. So every project has roads and railroads and dams to have an amount of development. In reality, it brings a lot of death, a lot of destruction, and it brings violence to our people, which is in the struggle to guarantee the rights of traditional populations or indigenous peoples. It's been a long time our people have been making a lot of complaints against the miners who have been entering our territories. We have spoken by letter. The letters which are published, it is when the chiefs, the caciques, are speaking, women are speaking. It's not only one person that speaks, but yes, people are feeling the violence inside the territory. The indigenous people are seeing and feeling the violences inside the territory. And we have been making complaints, not only the indigenous people, but also great entrepreneurs which own helicopters and airplanes and gas stations. Almost every day they practically run the city. And when we make the complaint, they see as villain the person that makes the complaint. And they say, this person has to die. Not only me, but other leaderships who are struggling to defend the territory. But this comes with the help of the federal government, the state. If the state didn't encourage, this violence wouldn't exist. To say that the indigenous people needs to develop what? Develop the death of their own people, the death of the river, the death of their children. No. We that struggle, we do not negotiate the territory, and we will never negotiate it. And we also see that the Supreme Court will also process the minister's decision about the Bill 490. It's about stopping indigenous land demarcation. There are still many indigenous lands that need to be demarcated. Many, many. A lot of indigenous people have been for a long time asking for their lands to be demarcated. But their land is being invaded, and one of them is mine, where my people live, in the medium part of Tapajós. These are two territories that need to be demarcated. And if it's approved at the Supreme Court, it will be established that indigenous people are only entitled to those lands that were in their possession on October 5th of the year 1988. If it happens, it will destroy the dreams of indigenous peoples. It'll take the life out of them. And we see that many people, not only mine, were displaced because of the government, because of a promise to give a piece of land, to build a power plant, a promise to give a land because a railway will be built, and it actually never happened. And sometimes the indigenous people help the state knowing that one day they will be deceived. And this is happening, right? We can be deceived. Only who is struggling really in the front knows that we won't be deceived because we understand we will defend life. Last week, as we have made many complaints talking about the invaders, they attacked one village, a village of a great warrior, and the chief saw it all. In the state, the federal police was there and couldn't do anything. Last week, as we have made many complaints talking about invaders, they attacked a village of a great warrior, and the chief saw it all. And the state, federal police was there and couldn't do anything. They only spent one day. People burned the village, others hit their machinery, but then on the other day, the day they burned the house of Maria Neuza, by incentive of Pariwati, non-indigenous people, they unfortunately, the police itself, negotiated with the city, with the mayor, and left. And they left the leaderships and children on the hands of bad people. Right? The incentive of Pariwati was to burn down helicopters, burn down trucks and bridges, so that they could vacate the property. The Pariwati only make a fuss, but then they run away. They call everyone, and then everybody runs away. And then it happened. What happened is that the Pariwati went there, encouraged violence, but then had no courage to face the federal police, and they ran away and left the indigenous people covering for them. And then we say that they put those people to defend their machinery, but we who are in the front, we won't let that happen. We have to struggle to defend the territory. A lot of bills, like Brazil, is also signatory of the Convention 69 of OIT, and it also can be extinguished here in Brazil. And then we ask, what about our rights? With this government, this president, which is called Bolsonaro, he only brings violence. He only brings bad things. He only approves of death projects for our people. How can we end this, right? How can we end with what comes out of this man's mouth? He says one thing, and what he says, it just happens. It is already happening here, the violence. And he talks in the name of God, and then I keep asking myself, what God is this? Who wants violence? Who wants the destruction of the forest? The destruction of the peoples who are defending it? Yesterday, it was the Day of the Environment. So, how can we celebrate the Day of the Environment? We cannot celebrate it because our people are dying. They are attacking us. They are destroying our souls, our sacred places. How can we celebrate the environment? Are we only going to celebrate when really all of our indigenous peoples are gone, who are struggling? When we see our fish floating, poisoned, when we see the whole forest burned to the ground and torn apart, how are we going to celebrate the environment if all the projects are being approved? And this president has help. He has help because who buys gold or who builds the dams? It's not us. It's the international countries. The countries are guilty of the violence. Who are the buyers of soy, of timber, everything? They're also responsible for the destruction of our people. They are responsible for the destruction. But we are going to fight. We have always made self-demarcation. We have advisory protocols. What we need is a project of good living for our people, not only violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, everybody. This is a pleasure to be able to see again so many people after we had the Well Living Forum in Marabá, when we had a chance to have such interesting days of deep-rooted experiences when we went through practices, and being able to continue today with that liaison. It is crucial for us to be together in this effort to understand this framework for the necropolitics which is being implemented in Brazil, which has been orchestrated and conceived by various factors of economic and social interests, also interests in terms of designing a society. So we have this ongoing agroecological mandate. It's actually the second mandate. We had the first one from 2016 to 2020, and we were elected again with the best constituency in the city of Florianopolis. It's important to be mentioned that it happened at this very critical moment where the Socialism and Liberty Party is an important expression here in the city of Florianopolis. It's the largest faction in the city council. And we have been developing this work which tries to strike a balance between ecology and social justice, and to put up some confrontation to structuring issues from the point of view of this relationship with society, communities, and territories, without losing sight of the need and the urgency of being passionate about the processes and understanding ecology and all of its dimensions, and not refraining from reporting on that which we understand as injustice or even disasters from the point of view of a society that is looking to strike this balance. So, Dan made this introduction. It's important for us to point at the legislative effort we have put in, because from those who deny politics or the anti-politics, which has provided solid grounds to what has been happening in Brazil, which started this structure and allowed for this for the election of Bolsonaro. They say that laws are not important. They actually are looking at doing away with laws. So this more liberal outlook on the position and the role of the state and the objective of the government. So this is a fertile ground for this fascist environment. But we believe in the role and the importance of the state in terms of regulating activities, particularly activities that have to do with well living and common living. In that sense, in the previous mandate, we could actually pass 4 pieces of legislation, which I think are very important in that sense and at this moment, because they speak very much to this wonderment, which is first to transform the Santa Catarina island of fertilizer-free area. It is not an agricultural city, but it shares this message because we actually put up this fight and we passed a law that forbids fertilizers and pesticides, because we understand that those are harmful to the human health. So this law is very important, and the Santa Catarina Federation of Agriculture and the Brazilian Confederation of Agriculture, they said it's constitutional, but it is not, because forbidding those products is necessary because they intoxicate people, they intoxicate the environment, and this point of from the point of view of intoxication, and from the toxic level of those products is not brought to the table. So legislation was approved in that sense, but also legislation was approved to promote and put up this agroecological legislation. But it's a challenge to think about a legislation that will share this punishing message, and from the pedagogical point of view, and just put that to practice from the place where we stand, from our stand in the legislative branch, when we are minority, when we are opposition, when we are trying to just put out different fires every day. But somehow we adhere to this objective. We never lose sight of the motivations that put forth that which we need to fight and that which we need to promote in our society in order to help understand the fight we're in. And there was also a change that we made to our organic law, which is the municipal constitution, by including a piece. This piece gives right to nature. It transforms nature in a subject of rights, meaning this is something that has been discussed for a long time. And it was important progress, even though there was reduced understanding on the part of the most of the city councilors. Most of them did not understand what they were doing, but we now have a legal framework which is currently being used by this public class action, by a group of research and legal development from the Federal University of Santa Catarina that gives voice and brings the right to Lagoa da Conceição Lake to be a living beer. And this action has achieved international repercussion, which means giving voice and giving rights to those who do not have a voice or a rights within the Constitution. It's very, very close to the proposal of an ecocide. So this is very important to establish legal and juridical terms, to give a voice and to give a moment for those who do not have the rights. As Alessandra mentioned before, and Alessandra and Claudelice, it's totally unacceptable for us to have a society where which is the one that kills the most environmental activists across the country, across the planet. So we have the most violence against environmental activists and environmental defenders. And it's not something that's happening today. It's been going on for decades. So we need to take a stand about it. So as legislators, we also have to make space for activists to go out to the streets and to be held accountable in the streets, and to have a footprint in the communities, and to support community fights, whichever they are, and whatever dimension they're included. But this is an effort that has to be made, because the parliament is also this place where, if we look at it from a certain perspective, it may seem harmful or useless, but it is a very important voice. And occupying this space is crucial for our voice. This is why it's crucial not to be a lone voice in the parliament. We do find special people, which include Célio Torino and Lívia, who is another city councilor who is very close to us, Professor Paulo Horta, who is an environmental activist and a crucial researcher for the core of our fight. And the parliamentary effort is to be liaising with all of those who make their best towards this interest of society, organized society, and the university, academic world, and many people individually who are kind of lost. They don't know how or where to put in efforts towards a more fair society, a more ecological society. So adding our efforts to all of the other daily fights that are put up every day. So we have actions together with other mandates, and we can elaborate on that afterwards in the interest of time. So I'd like to express my gratitude and to say that we are together in this alliance, which is totally necessary.
First, I would like to greet everyone and manifest my expressed solidarity to the people of the forest and to everyone who is on the front line of this struggle. At this moment, especially Alessandra and her people, I manifest my solidarity to everyone and the recognition for this struggle, which belongs to every one of us. Well, in Brazil, I am part of an association of judges for democracy. It is a non-corporatist association of judges for the constitutional defense of human rights. I am also part of the Association of Environmental Law Professors. We have a constitution that already predicts ecological rights. We have there the guarantee of essential ecological processes, a fundamental right, and therefore a immutable clause in the Constitution, and of this right to an ecologically balanced environment. Essential for hosting quality of life, therefore a fundamental right, a human right. But what we see is that despite this entire development since the 70s, all of this framework, both national and international, is a failure to protect and an accelerated degradation. And all of these questions that were put to me here are extremely challenging. Because how can we break up with violence, with the atrocities, with the dislegitimacy of those that occupy the power, which is of the people? Very complicated. So I guess we're going through a moment of disruption of this philosophical paradigm that supports this anthropocentric view. Then we have to effectively break up in every level. So I congratulate Marquito a lot. I congratulate Alberto Costa. It is an honor to be here with you. For that matter, of breaking up with this anthropocentric paradigm. Yes, so that we can get out of this place of domination, of this relation of domination with nature. So we have to effectively integrate this to our political pact that we are only part of. We are all part of a whole, and we have to give voice so that the entire ecosystem may live, because everything is connected. We are all in connection. And our existence, including now at this moment, is vulnerable as mankind. We all have our existence in a risky situation because of that condition. This imbalance in this ever man-nature relation. So I guess that attributing rights for nature, a legal status to nature, is essential for the cultural disruption, even in the relation of man with nature. However, together with this, the reaffirmation, the confirmation that we are a non-finished project of modernity. So besides the right to freedom and beside the social rights of economical, social, and cultural equality, we put together this ecological right so that we can close this deal and maybe save the planet and save ourselves with dignity. So from the legal point of view, that's it. We have to guarantee the attribution of a legal status so that we can effectively make an eco-legal revolution, as Frigid Capra and Hugo Mattei say. Okay, but then we're gonna have the law, and what are we going to do with this law? We have to implement it, make it effective. After all, the theory of fundamental rights says that every fundamental human right has to be effective, otherwise it won't be good for nothing. And then I really liked what Claudelice said in her speech. She mentioned the agreement of Escazú because the fundamental rights, they have this procedure character. Before its imminent efficiency, its effectiveness, and these procedure rights are access to information, public participation in decision making, and access to justice. This is the triad of procedural fundamental rights. These are the ones that will make sure the rights are effectively going to be accomplished. And then the agreement of Escazú, it makes it binding, this triad of rights, from the international point of view. And once it is ratified by Brazil, it is possible to have the conventionality control. It gets into the Brazilian legal system and then it can be demanded. But we also have the agreement of Aarhus in this sense. But what I'm trying to say is that we are not using well all of these participation mechanisms which already exist in the Constitution. Maybe we don't even need the agreement of Escazú. And the example that Marquito already gave, which is the structural public civil action of Lagoa da Conceição, which is happening now in Brazil. And this action, besides attributing the condition of subject of right to Lagoa da Conceição, it goes beyond. It is structural, not because it aims an indemnity by a degradation or a demand, a one-off jurisdiction provision. What it tries to do is, before an absolutely inefficient government that can't keep up with its public policies of implementing them, the creation of a committee with all stakeholders involved. Then, reading the public civil action of Lagoa da Conceição, I kept imagining how can it be viable for the purposes of public safety policy in the Brazilian Amazon? Why? Because it's obvious that all stakeholders that have to act there either have failed or are not articulated, as it is obvious of an obsolete and fragmented Brazilian administration. Then how can we get all of these stakeholders articulated? It is by provoking this transparent and public articulation. Everyone should sit at the table periodically under a legal and public oversight that at this moment, with the executive branch taken by a delegitimized power, right? A power, anyway, I don't even have to say that. The legislative branch, also with its problems. Not that the judicial branch is the solution. That's not it. The solution is the people articulated. It is network. It is social movements. But we have a stake that we have to demand from it the implementation of our Constitution. We have a political pact to be fulfilled. Then today I see that these models of direct participation that the Constitution already puts at our disposal, whether it's the collective actions, whether it's the bills of popular initiative, they need to be better and more used. They are not being well used. Then, how not to file a structural public civil action to determine the Amazon is subject of rights, as has, by the way, the Supreme Court of Colombia already recognized that the Amazon forest is subject of rights there too. And they don't have a constitution for that either. Then, like that, we keep pushing this constitution to take it on and to accomplish that in practice. I would find it beautiful that all NGOs that are working so hard for the safety and for the safety of the forest and the defenders of the forest, all of the public agents, the social movements, the well-intended private sector, there must be, all get together and push the state through a structural judicial action so that there is an emergency committee for establishment and transparent implementation with popular oversight of the public safety of the Amazon immediately. And regarding ecocide, indeed, the International Criminal Court, which was created to judge international crimes of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, since 2016, has said that ecocide is indeed a crime against humanity. Then it is already possible to take it to the International Criminal Court, a crime of ecocide. But for that, really, the national states have to predict those crimes internally. And this is where we have this bill. Celio had already asked who was the author, and I personally don't know him. It is a congressperson of Minas Gerais, because he was actually casuistic because of the disruption of the dams of Mariana and Brumadinho. From then on, this bill came for the typification, the creation of the crime of ecocide in the Brazilian legal system. It was approved in the Chamber of Deputies and it stopped since October 19 at the Senate. Then I guess that the pressure has to be for the approval of this law, which is not one of the best. You may actually think about rewriting some things, but it is the creation of the crime of ecocide. It is going to be there typified, which enables actually the subjection to the International Criminal Court and the pressure for the ratification of the agreement of Escazú and the articulation of all stakeholders to really use better and more these direct participation mechanisms of the Constitution, which are already available. I appreciate the attention. I'm sorry if I went over my time.
Good afternoon. I would like to start by thanking you for the invitation. This invitation to be here together with people that I like so much, to see Dr. Fernanda, or Fernanda perhaps, who is a judge in Santos. She's also the sister-in-law of a very dear friend of mine, also Marquito. It's an excellent initiative of the Lagoa da Conceição as a subject of right. It allows for us to provide good example of this process so that we can incorporate nature rights in a broader manner. I listened to Alessandra as well, Munduruku. We're actually speaking while a process of genocide is actually going on in Brazil. And it goes along with ecocide. There's the broader genocide, which people might dispute whether it is really happening or not, because it hits the entire population regardlessly, but it revolves around the federal government's policy of denial in terms of fighting COVID. That is leading to a process of genocide. In a matter of days, we will have reached a number of 500,000 deaths, Brazilian deaths, and millions, many millions of people with sequels which will have a major impact in the country in the future. We should remember that the Armenian Genocide, which was recently recognized by the Biden administration, included, which happened during the First World War by the Ottoman Empire. It was not similar to what happened to the Jewish people in Germany, but what the Ottoman Empire did was to get the Armenian people to roam the desert in multitudes, tens or hundreds of thousands of people. They would roam until they died. So this genocide was caused by negligence. And people would die to diseases, they would die to hunger, they would die to famine in the desert. So the numbers were somewhere around 1.4 million deaths. That's a more precise data we have. Now, what happens in Brazil is this genocide, and it's important to be named as such. At the same time, there are two other genocides going on. which relate directly with ecocide. Two ethical genocides. One is against the Munduruku people with federal government support. Those attacks are happening even when some state institutions, such as the federal police, have taken the side of the Munduruku people, but negligence, deliberate action on the part of the federal government, particularly the Ministry of the Environment, by allowing attacks against the Munduruku people, that is leading to genocide as well as to ethnocide in the sense of dispersion and internal division of the people, and to ecocide. The same thing happens in Roraima and in the Amazon state with the Yanomami people. Characterization of genocide in that case is even clearer, and it interrelates with ecocide. In the state of Roraima and the capital city, Boa Vista, the population can no longer eat fish because fish are contaminated by mercury out of mining activities. So that is the fact we are going through, we are experiencing in Brazil. It's very severe as we realize that our country has become a major laboratory for necropolitics, which interconnects genocide with ecocide, and we Brazilians have not yet been able to mobilize in order to stop that process. The world keeps abreast of it all, and it's necessary to be stopped. In 1994, there was a genocide in Rwanda against the Tutsis and the Hutus, moderate Hutus, which led to 800,000 deaths in a matter of 100 days. And now many nations apologize for not being able to stop that process. And it's happening in Brazil, and it's likely to become even more intense in coming months, for sure in the next 1 year, with increased political tension. We have force that is connected to the ugliest and the evilest things produced in mankind, controlling the state, and they are not going to give way easily. So the way to remain there will be to enhance necropolitics, which is based on ethnocide, ecocide, and genocide. This is something that has to be made very, very clear. And to wrap up, concerning the construction, this framework of rights, and we have Alberto Acosta who will be able to elaborate on that. What we are building, actually, what Latin America, despite being a continent with lots of contradictions, in addition to being in the midst of many horrors, it is actually a laboratory for a new constitutionalism, Latin American constitutionalism in broader sense, but based on knowledge of ancient peoples, which are summarized in the understanding that nature can no longer be seen as source of resources where human beings can go and tap and take control of it all, much the other way around, because for original peoples, what capitalist and Western society refers to as our resources, for them, they are our relatives. The hills, the waters, the rivers, the leaves, the animals, all of them are relatives in this community of the earth. And this is where we have to be going to. And as I said in the beginning, we are in the following situation. We need to advance with legislation that it is clear that will break away with anthropocentrism, that will have living on the planet presented in a different way. But at the same time, we are living on the brink of disaster, humanitarian disaster, a big one that's happening not only in Brazil, in South America. Let's look at what's happening in Colombia too, and perhaps Peru will be joining with this intense participation after the elections, the second round of elections. But here in Brazil, particularly, it has to be stopped, and it has to be understood as a civilization emergency. Otherwise, the situation is likely to get even worse. Good afternoon, good evening, and perhaps also good morning. It is a pleasure for me to be able to share some thoughts and to be able to do that with some of the people that I know personally, with Celio. That is very motivating to me, and I do so from the Andes. And I do so with an eye on the moment that mankind is going through. And the time I have, I think of addressing 3 points, or to get to those thoughts from 3 different perspectives. The first one is, it's very important for us to recognize where the history of mankind is right now. The second one is, what are the prevailing trends which are of great concern, as I will be showing you. And the third point, there needs to recover alternatives from those communities and from those societies that have a long memory. So let's start from the first point. We are going through this extreme moment, as Claudia was telling us. It is an extreme moment in the history of mankind, which should allow us to get to know, to understand, and to be able to think as well as possible about why we are in such a complex situation. Like never before, we have suffered a multifaceted crisis which hits very hard millions and millions of people across the planet. We see lives being destroyed, families living in misery, peoples who are experiencing hunger again. They're being excluded. The problems have become even harder. Coronavirus, for instance, which is a very serious problem, is not the cause of those difficulties. It has added to the problems. They made them even more complex. So we should ask ourselves, why are we where we are? And we will find some answers. Behind so many problems, what we see is the degradation of ecosystems. For instance, permanent destruction of the Amazon. We find the exhaustion of resources. We find the extinction of many species. We find the pollution of the biosphere. We find the destruction of biodiversity, and that explains the destruction of biodiversity. More than 70% of the virus that hit mankind, which includes the coronavirus, in the past 30 years, they have a zoonotic origin, meaning they come from animals whose habitats have been destroyed. We have surpassed the biophysical limits, and we have done so by means of this civilization of capital, which lives by stifling the life of human beings and of nature. And it's not a matter of condemning ecocides or genocides. There is ecocides, genocides, and ethnocides. In addition to that, we are killing the fragile democracies we have. And I think that this has to be made very clear, too. And in this scene, inequalities increase, violence increases, and social services deteriorate, and hunger is increased. The various forms of violations against nature is increased, which is extractivism. And along with extractivism, we have corruption, we have authoritarianism, and those roots get even deeper, the roots of a patriarchal regime. And before we get to the second point, I think we should be using the correct terms. We are not facing a climate change only. Across the history of the Earth, millions and millions of years, there have been many climate changes. What we are experiencing now is a climate collapse, which has been triggered by the Anthropocene, but we have to add the complete name to it, the capitalist scene. The civilization of patriarchal and colonial capital has generated the destruction of the planet. That's the starting point, and that's how I see it. Now, the second point, the second theme I'm concerned with is that this type of understanding, and I think all of us here share that. Fernanda, Claudia, I think you will agree. It is not shared by those who are leading the political and economic power. There could be exceptions. There could be themes where there's some light, there's some clarity. But I am very anguished to see that there's an intention to return to normality now. But if normality was abnormality, which was the cause of all problems, I understand that we all want to get back to this, to overcome this tragedy of the pandemic. We want to go to settings where we will be able to embrace our loved ones, my grandchildren and my great grandchildren. I'd love to see them. I'd love to be close to my friends. But what we see is that response from power is more of the same: more economic growth, more exports, more foreign investments, more extractivism, more violence, more corruption. And this is not more of the same, but it is rather more of the worst. Last year, 2020, fires in the Amazon have increased much more than in previous years. And my concern is that what is going to happen in 2021? That is the destruction of the Amazon. That's the destruction of Chiquitania in Bolivia, the destruction of the forests in Congo, the destruction of forests in Indonesia, and all of that just to meet the demands of capital all over, as some of our panelists here would say before. People who are defending the life are seen as enemies of the states. This is the problem. By means of this brutal process, the world has reached denaturation of nature and dehumanization of mankind. Mercantilization of life has triggered huge destruction. We have two themes: the Amazon, the destruction of the Amazon, which keeps increasing everywhere with ecocide, genocide, and ethnocide. I could mention many other cases you will know. Plus, you certainly know more situations of violence than me. But this search for development, search for progress based on productivism and on consumerism, that has caused and is causing this brutal disease, which is developed by individualism, which is a social ailment. England and Japan, for instance, they have this ministry of solitude, which is to serve the people, the life of people who have nothing left to them. And that is not something that was caused by the pandemic. It actually started back in time, and we need to start thinking about options. At this point in time, we have to strengthen the principle of responsibility, the human responsibilities to preserve the cycles of nature. We have to accept the relevance of nature, but we have to go even further. We have to understand that we are not human beings are not the ones who are called upon to master nature. We have to understand that in practice, human beings are nature. We cannot continue to exploit it. We cannot continue to destroy it. Nature can survive without human beings, but we human beings cannot survive with Mother Earth. And as I speak of Mother Earth, I refer to the original peoples to whom Mother Earth is not a metaphor, but it is rather a reality. What do we have to do? To confront the ground elements of modernity. We were speaking about having to break paradigms. We have to bring down statues which sit on the market and patriarchalism, and we have to take steps towards biocentric visions to leave anthropocentrism. And we have to change from nature object into nature subject. But there's one thing: we do not give any rights to nature. Nature gives us the right to life. So A biocentric focus comes forth as we recognize the indivisibility and the interdependence of all forms of life, which is what supports the rights of nature and human rights. One cannot go without the other. This is the big challenge we have, and this is what we have to build from the bottom up.
This has just been the most humbling and fascinating hour and a half already, and I just feel so honored and privileged to be in this company, and grateful to have this opportunity to speak. So thank you all so much for being here and for listening to me, and to all of each other as well. This feels like such a potential for collaboration in this virtual room today. So that is absolutely wonderful. And I think I would like to start from where Alberto just left off, which is about something about, for me, a kind of a reality check. You know, our economic system, as he was pointing out, all sort of based on continual growth and extractivism, is, I believe, a kind of a, what we might call a flat earth attitude, in the sense that we all know that if you continue to walk to the west, eventually you're going to realize that the earth isn't flat. In the same way, we are very close, I think. And of course, in Brazil, you are all very immediately aware that one cannot continue to extract from a finite resource. One cannot continue to treat the ecosystems with which we are profoundly intertwined as something that is separate and to be dominated. And so I think that the whole project, global work that I'm involved in bringing a criminalization of destruction of nature is a response to that awareness. And also realizing that the system, the legal system within which we operate globally, which is, as Alberto's pointed out, is essentially a colonial system, and it's been exported from the global north, the Western paradigm, sees nature as other. And I think the bridging piece that we believe ecocide law can be comes in where we simply add a crime to a list of crimes that is already there at the international level, which are designated the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole. And from everything that we've been hearing this evening, the effects, the deadly effects of mass destruction of nature, of ecocide, a word with which you are all much more familiar than most audiences that I address. So the effects of ecocide are already deadly. They already have repercussions in the social sphere, in terms of social and racial justice, in terms of the very, very real physical, horrific consequences of pollution and toxification, and so on. And so already ecocide is a crime of most serious concern to the international community as a whole. In the reality, it simply hasn't been listed as a crime amongst those others. And that is what our campaign aims to do. And I think that it's probably worth explaining a little bit about how we approach this particular aim and initiative, and why we do it at the international level, and perhaps along the way to see how that can support and help all of you in your struggles and your fights over in Brazil. So we aim for this crime to become a reality at the International Criminal Court. And there's the first reason for that is quite a simple practical reason, which is that the International Criminal Court is the only global mechanism which directly accesses the criminal justice systems of all its member states. That means that if you make something a crime at the International Criminal Court, any member state which ratifies that crime must also include it in its own domestic legislation. So it's probably the most efficient way to create a serious new law that will apply in a similar way across many jurisdictions and has that potential. And that's important because, and this goes back to what Alessandra Munduruku was saying, which is that some of the key offenders with serious environmental crime are big transnational corporations. And so they have potentially the capacity to jump from one jurisdiction to another according to where the regulation is more lax. So to have an international law that can be applied in many countries has some obvious advantages. It's also important because ecocide is, again, in the same vein of thinking, is largely a corporate crime. It is also often endorsed and supported by political relationships. And of course, nowhere is that more obvious than in Brazil. But because it is a corporate crime, it is not necessarily restricted to being prosecuted only at the International Criminal Court, which is a slow-moving and not historically hugely effective institution for individual prosecutions. However, it is very important because it's possible to prosecute key political actors there who could not be prosecuted in their own jurisdictions. However, with a crime of ecocide, because it is largely a corporate crime, it means that this crime could be prosecuted in any ratifying jurisdiction. So just to give a random example that I'm inventing on the spot, an American company, and now this is interesting because America, the US, is not actually a member of the International Criminal Court. So firstly, America cannot prevent this law from going forward because they don't have a vote, and that's useful. But let's just say that an American company, for example, might be committing ecocidal activity in a country which is a member state, could be Brazil, for example, and they might have an operational office in Belgium, for example. Belgium is a front runner in this developing momentum around ecocide. It was the first European country to bring the subject up at the International Criminal Court a few months ago. Now, in theory, that means that a prosecution could be taken in Belgium against a country from, against a perpetrator from the US who is committing a crime in Brazil. So you sort of get the sense that there is a broadening of the possibilities of where these crimes can be held to account. And that is very important. The second reason is that, politically speaking, even countries that in theory or that speak very well about environmental issues, in practice find it difficult to be the first on the block to legislate for ecocide because of embedded political relationships and economic relationships. It's quite difficult to do something like this overnight. And France is an example where this is happening at the moment. They are trying to legislate for ecocide nationally, and they're ending up with a definition which is quite watered down, shall we say, in order to try to have it pass at the national level. In Brazil, you already have a law that appears to be sort of halted in the legislative process, that hasn't been able to be taken through because at the national level, there is a political bias against taking it through. However, to support this at the international level is politically safer for many countries. And we don't expect Brazil to be anywhere near the front of this queue. to criminalize ecocide. Let's not have any illusions about that. But at the same time, there are many countries, and we've been working with, in particular, some of the more forward-thinking European countries, but also small island developing states, small Pacific islands, for example, like Vanuatu, and other island states who have a very immediate sense of the danger of the climate crisis. And so they have an immediate incentive to be more moving forward with this. So what we're seeing is the beginnings of a real groundswell of support from a mixture of nations willing to move this forward at the international level. And for the reasons I just explained, we believe that doing this at the international level is ultimately going to be the most practical way to move forward, because this crisis that we're experiencing globally, and that in Brazil you are experiencing so immediately, is not a situation where we can point at another country or point at another group and say, you know, the leak is at your end of the boat. You know, this is the boat of the earth, and we have to all, you know, we must all collaborate. And this speaks to what Fernando was saying about joining forces and really becoming not just a movement for one thing, but a movement that joins so many different initiatives towards moving away from a relationship of harm with nature to a relationship of harmony with nature. And that is precisely what we feel this particular piece of legislation has the ability to sort of shift cultural mindsets, even, if you like. And this takes me to my third point about why we aim for this at the international level. Because part of the problem that we're witnessing, and that you've described in many different ways, is that our understanding of nature and our appreciation of nature, and even our laws as they stand that are meant to protect nature, are not taken seriously enough. We are still embedded in what has really been 2,000 years of a dualistic mindset. In the Western thinking, this goes right back to Plato, with the division between the ideal and the real. It runs right through the domination of the Catholic Church between spirit and body. It goes straight on into the Enlightenment with reason versus emotion, body, nature. You know, the Western way of thinking has this so deeply embedded that the situation we have now with capitalist extractivist policies and the way that a few, a privileged few, treat both nature and other people as a resource is almost the natural conclusion of this incredibly long history. And so what we're kind of looking to do with criminalizing ecocide at the top level, at the level of international law, is to have to send a really strong message to the whole world that destroying nature is both legally and morally unacceptable. Because in the sort of dominant Western legal way of thinking, which has come to dominate the globe, we use criminal law to draw the moral lines. So nobody's going to actually consciously and transparently approach a government and say, I would like a permit to kill, you know, a couple of thousand people because it's going to be good for jobs. They can't say that because it's a crime and it's completely morally unacceptable. But you can, at the moment, go to a government and ask for a permit for mining, or a permit for, you know, oil and gas extraction, or a permit for deep sea fishing, which is going to destroy entire swathes of the seabed. So this just shows how we have not yet shifted the potential for serious destruction of nature beneath the same moral red line that we use for the destruction of people and property. And so we believe that criminalizing ecocide at the highest level has the potential to do this. I think it also, and this speaks to what Marquita and Alessandra both brought up around, and Celio around environmental defenders and how they have been victimized and persecuted, and with horrific violence in many cases. And this is at least in part because the activities of those large companies and those invasive miners, for example, are supported by the legal system. And so those who object to those things become framed as the criminals. When if we can shift that criminality to this much damage is not acceptable, if we can shift that criminality, we also shift the position of those environmental defenders. And what we're then saying about those environmental defenders is that they are upholding the law. And that's a morally very, very different position to be in. So that is another aspect that we believe will be important. Another point that really sort of struck me when Alessandra was talking was about the responsibility of those corporations, the foreign buyers of the goods that are being made at the cost of the local communities and of the ecosystems. And the interesting thing from our perspective over here in Europe is that there is beginning to be quite a strong shift now amongst the public perception of the origin of goods. So that, for example, the supermarkets over here are having to become very conscious of their public image and of where they are seen to be sourcing their products. And I recently saw a letter that was actually written by a consortium or a conglomerate of soya buyers who had actually written to the Brazilian government last year to warn them to please not pass the what has been termed in English the land grabbing bill, or the bill against the demarcation. And those same companies are willing again to use their voices to pressurize the Brazilian government, and to say that if that bill is allowed to pass, then they no longer wish to source their products from Brazil. So I would like to perhaps drop that little drop of positive development into the mix, because that's something that we're also seeing happening over here. And I think the criminalization at the international level is also has already been sort of called upon from Brazil with an accusation, with a filing at the International Criminal Court against Jair Bolsonaro. And you're probably aware that this was filed earlier this year by Chief Raoni through some French lawyers. And it was filed under crimes against humanity. But Chief Raoni was very explicit that he wanted to file under the crime of ecocide, but ecocide was not yet in place. And so it was filed under crimes against humanity. And I do wonder whether, had ecocide been in place as a crime, that filing could perhaps have been made sometime earlier, before the level of crimes against humanity associated with that ecocide had come to the point that they've now reached. We've also been in communication with other spokespeople from South America around the Escazú agreement, which Fernanda brought up. And I think this is also going to be a hugely important agreement. So I think, again, we're looking at the possibility of joining forces on the communication side of all of this to bring these different legal instruments, these tools, into play. And I very much hope that what can emerge from this meeting is a kind of collaborative approach to moving forward, and perhaps most importantly in Brazil, to amplifying this movement in terms of a conversation, so that I'm hoping so that all of those groups and communities who have been suffering the horrors of different kinds of ecocide can raise their voices around the concept of stopping ecocide at the international level, so that it becomes clear that there is something that can be done that can have an influence directly, potentially, on the situations that you're all suffering in Brazil, and that it may not, that your own government's current reluctance to act in the right way and in relation to nature may not be the ultimate obstacle. There may be this movement beyond that is gathering momentum around the world that can also bring help and a legal tool that can be useful for all of you.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Well, at first, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to be here. I feel very honored. And I'd like to thank you for everything I've learned and what I've received here. And ask for your permission for the new girl to come and share this experience that we have been building and learning here in Florianopolis. The collective mandates in Brazil, they already have accumulated one legislation, right, in Alto Paraíso, in Goiás. We have had our first collective mandate elected in the country. A mandate which was shared by 3 people. After that, in 2018, at that election, when we suffered a lot with the advancement of fascism and all of the scenario brought here, we elected in Brazil 2 mandates for collective state representatives. One in Pernambuco, which are the boards, and the other one in São Paulo, the activist mandate. Each collective with a different composition. And at the last election in 2020, this model and the possibility to build popular mandates, mostly with compositions that aggregate different diversities, cosmovisions, it was widespread, and particularly our political group chose this strategy, launching good living collectives throughout the country, down in Rio, here in Joinville, and here in Florianopolis. Here in Florianopolis, we gathered 5 women. Me, Livia, I am one of them. Maine is one of the other co-counselors. Cynthia, Marina, and Josileia. These are 5 distinct representations. Me, with my African descendant origin, I am black, we are all feminists. Marina, a person from the youth, that certainly represents student struggle for promotion of education. Maine is also a black person, vegan, and that brings different perspectives. Also Josileia, which is indigenous of the people Kaingang, brings the representation inside the city council as well. And Cynthia, who has a history of struggle not only in the activism of social assistance, the strengthening of public policies in the city, but also building all of our actions oriented to the dissemination, implementation, growth, and transformation of society from our understanding, our perspective of good living. So the collective Bem Viver Floripa was successful. We were elected, we shared with Marquito the task of mandate in the city council. We learned a lot from him, and we have on him an example, including like a reference, not only of acting in a city, but also in the political construction he made. And it's this way, the relationship with the communities for us is also very important. And while I was listening here, a question came to my mind, and we have been having a dialogue inside the mandate, which is the matter of memory. The coast brought the memory of different people, the ancient memory, and particularly here in Florianopolis. Florianopolis, for those who don't know, is in the state of Santa Catarina in the south of Brazil. And the history told here, it denies the presence of indigenous peoples, and it denies also the presence of enslaved people coming from Africa. And in the recent past, it also suppresses the culture that originated from the process of colonization from the Azorean people communities. All of these peoples have a culture that is well settled in collectivity, which are expressed here, for example, in the Azorean culture, in the form of collective fishing. We are quite in this period, and with some conflicts, actually. It is when you pass the net and you pull the net, and there's this collective environment that is established for the fish of mullet. The collectivity of the Bantu people, which in its majority were brought here from Africa, is the greatest expression where the I doesn't exist. But there is the community perspective that is always ahead. And I'm not talking about the people that are original from this region. So this perspective of memory for us is very important to think good living, to think about this separation between man and nature, to think and to bring the message of good living in a process, even of cultural reversion, that somehow we also do not have the answer, but we have been looking for these answers. And for us, this telling of the story, for us to bring this sense of belonging to our population is also important, because from this memory, we can find this memory, and it brings this memory of unity. And what is it like to be a co-counselor? Okay, now being more objective, because I have little time and I apologize. We officially have here in Brazil, well, we don't have a legislation that defines collective mandates. However, we are evolving. We have good perspectives, including the bills that are already being discussed in the legislative chamber. And today, we have 27 collective mandates elected in Brazil, with quite different proposals, with quite similar organizations. Officially then, Cynthia is the counselor, the person that gave her personal registration, that has the registration at the regional electoral court. Then officially, she's the one that speaks inside the city council. She's the one that occupies the rooms, and she's the one that signs the documents. But our acting has been collective inside the house and in the commissions that we participate of, where we get to have the voice. And actually here, despite the quite conservative environment, of the City Council of Florianopolis, we have one of the best situations regarding collective mandates. Presentially, we accompany Cynthia during the plenary session, and we have had the opportunity to speak in the commissions. We have been received really as co-counselors, but our acting, it is also outside the City Council, which for us is very important. This continuous dialogue with the community, with its different stakeholders. And then our identities, they can also be manifested in the sense that one area which is of more interest of one of us, this is where we act on more powerfully. These are the dialogues that we participate of. These are the constructions that we act on outside, and then we bring it inside without mentioning the process of decision making and internal organization of the cabinet. Hello everyone. It is a pleasure to be here and listening to every one of your remarks. Some of them provoke us a lot and question where we are and where we're going. It is here alongside Tocantins River in the city of Marabá, and remembering that today is our last day of the 6th pilgrimage of the Martyrs of the Forest. It is a great tribute, a memory, and a renovation of struggle after 10 years of the murder of Maria and her husband Zé Cláudio. Viva Maria, viva! I was there, strong and serene, in the same place for years. I served you with my beauty and fruit, and suddenly I no longer exist. You approached not to harvest or to embrace me, but to begin your ritual. I cried with pain, but you silenced me, bit by bit, devastating me, until I fell to the ground. But I still have roots. I will shoot up, yes, between the teeth of your chainsaw.
This poem was written by Claudenir Ribeiro, which is Claudenice's sister, sisters of José Cláudio. They co-manage Jetai, which is a group of extractivist artisan women here from the region who carry on with this important struggle, inspiring us so that we can resist to what already happens here. Whether it's the mega mining projects, whether it is the project in the community where I am now, it is receiving its first work, which is a retaining wall. A retaining wall so that ships can pass carrying cattle, ore, and soy. And right ahead, there is a great harbor. As so many stories, they deceive communities, saying it is a project for the community. But when we read the sign, which talks about the work, it says it is a port work. But no one has any idea of what is about to come in a short period of time. May we carry on with hope, facing so many challenges, as we have seen here today, and resisting and creating alternative projects. Whether it is a law against ecocide, whether it is community projects, whether it is good living for a city, for a state, for a country. May we carry on dreaming in dialogue.
Por la Amazonía luchamos y gritamos. Escuche el grito de la selva. Sus hijos y hijas claman por justicia. Escuche el grito de la selva. Sus hijos y hijas claman por justicia. Paren el ecocidio. Paren el genocidio. Paren la pandemia. Paren el pandemonio.